Welcome to The Art of Medicine, the program that explores the arts, business, and clinical aspects of the practice of medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Wilner. Today, I'm excited to speak with Frank Forencich. Frank is a martial artist, former columnist for Paleo Magazine, and co-creator of the organization Activism is Medicine. He's going to tell us what that's all about. But first, I'd like to thank our sponsor, locumstory.com. Maybe you're curious about locums and how it might fit into your career story. But do you know all the different reasons physicians choose locums and how it works for them? At locumstory.com, you can hear firsthand stories as diverse as physicians themselves. There's not one solution for everyone. The variety of opportunities might surprise you. Locum Story is an unbiased educational resource. It has tools that let you explore trends in your specialty and compare different locums agencies. There's even a simple quiz to see if locums is right for you. Do your own research at locumstory.com. It's easy. And now to my guest, welcome Frank Forencich.
Great to be here.
Frank, thanks for joining me. I know you have a book, Activism is Medicine, that has morphed into an organization. And, I was attracted to you as a guest because I can see that your background was not linear. And for those of you who know me, my background was not linear. My quite circuitous to get where I am today, for better or worse. But I want to hear your story. So where should we start?
Right. Well, we could start with a brief look at my childhood because I was a pretty sick little kid, pretty weak. I had a lot of immune disorders and asthma, allergy, that whole cluster of things. And then later on in high school, I got involved in sports and swimming and water polo, and that changed everything for me. I became healthy and I became fit and I became really interested in the body and movement and exercise and everything else. So then in college, I started in the program in human biology at Stanford. And at the same time, I signed up for martial arts. And those two kind of played off each other to create my career, as it were. The great thing about the program in human biology was my professors took a really big view of the body in an evolutionary context. And they were always talking about Africa. And they say, if you want to learn about the body, you've got to go to Africa. And so I did. I said, okay, I'm going to do that. And I went and I was able to see what they call the ancestral environment for human beings. And I was able to visit a lot of the fossil museums, that kind of thing, and get that big picture view. I even went out with some hunter-gatherers, some bushmen, and was able to see what their lifestyle was like. So that was tremendously exciting for me. And then I continued my training in martial arts for years, and I got involved in massage therapy and athletic training, and all of this revolving around health and the state of the modern human body. And of course, then I had to write about it. So that's how the book came to be.
Interesting. Well, we have some kinship. I have a bachelor's of science in biology from Yale. And my focus actually was on all the creatures that are not human, particularly invertebrate zoology.
Right.
And that evolved into a big, almost a career in marine science. So I think those early formative years are pretty important. So I got to ask, people are always doing all these adventurous, exciting things. And it's like, do you have a day job or did this become your day job?
I've had a variety of day jobs. I've done a lot of blue collar construction type work to fill the gaps, and that was my family background. So I know how to swing a hammer, that kind of thing. And I've done some other things, but now I'm exclusively focused on the writing and presentation and trying to make things happen in the world.
All right, let's talk about your book. You got
Okay.
a copy of it handy?
I do. I'll hold it up here for people to see. Activism is Medicine. And I've got the podcast on there and the subtitle, Health and Relevance for the Human Animal.
Yeah, well, I've always stressed that people are animals. some more than others, but right, I mean, we don't like to think of ourselves that way, it seems, but we're just one other organism on the planet. And there's a lot of ego, I think, that makes us think we're more important than the others, but we have a lot in common with the others. So
Right.
tell me
And that's,
what you found.
well, that's why I take what you might call a veterinarian approach to the human animal. And I'm always fascinated why we have this divide between veterinary medicine and conventional human medicine. Why do we have that? And I think there's no practical reason it should be that way. But that's historical. That's a legacy that we have. And part of it, as you say, is our attitude and our belief in human supremacy and human exceptionalism. And that is not just a minor conceit. That is at the heart of our modern environmental problems. This idea that we can treat the natural world as other, as disposable, as nothing more than a resource. And we have to get away from that. We need to move towards participation, towards a biocentric view in our relationship with the rest of life. And we have a lot of work to do on that front.
There is a concept of being stewards of the environment. What do you think about that?
That's an interesting one, because on one hand, it makes perfect sense. Yes, we should take care. But on the other hand, it still keeps us in that exalted position. We are the ones who are going to save the earth now, even though it sounds so much like a personal relationship gone bad. The husband abuses the wife and then says, okay, I'm going to save you, baby. It sounds a little bit like that.
Paternalistic, right? It's
Yeah, yeah.
paternalistic. We're not equal. Well, I remember growing up, there was this, well, what separates humans from all the other animals? And it was, well, people use tools. That it was back in the 60s. And then sort of exceptions started cropping up. There were birds that were using sticks, to poke little holes in things, and other animals using, rudimentary tools. But that you couldn't really say that that was a distinguishing factor. And I think the harder people look to find a real difference, um, they don't find one. They don't, and I agree with
Right.
you. I
Yeah,
agree.
Jane Goodall blew that whole thing wide open at Gambia in Tanzania with the chimps using the tools. And then later, Franz de Waal, the primatologist, noticed so many similarities between the chimps and the bonobos and humans that now it's becoming very clear. Let's put it that way.
I think the only real difference is that humans pay taxes. I think that might be, it's April 3rd, by the way, for those of you listening. So that's what's kind of present right now. So what about activism? Where does that come in?
Right. Well, this is something that I have been drawn into increasingly over the years. I grew up in California, and there was a lot of interest in the natural world and the people I hung out with, particularly in Yosemite Valley. I used to go climbing there, and there was a man named Yvon Chouinard, and he was the guy, he founded Patagonia later on, but he pioneered this ethic of clean climbing. He was very interested in making the sport relevant and having a good relationship with the mountains and the natural world. And of course, I read a lot about John Muir and that kind of thing. So that's my origin story with that. But the more I read about engagement and activism, I came to see it as a legitimate healthcare practice in its own right. And this goes back to, in a way, it's a very old idea. The Japanese have a word, ikigai, and that simply refers to having a sense of meaning and purpose. It's what gets you out of bed in the morning. And the science confirms this, because the science shows that people who have a sense of ikigai, meaning and purpose, actually do better with their medical outcomes. And this has been demonstrated. And it also reminds us of Viktor Frankl's work in the prison camp in World War II, where he noticed that prisoners in the camp who had a sense of meaning and purpose did better. And so it's an entirely valid healthcare orientation. And I am kind of surprised that it isn't getting more traction in the world of medicine. Why don't we ask patients about their sense of engagement, for example? If we're going to be holistic about it, shouldn't physicians be asking about this? And I've never experienced that. So I think that there's work to be done here. And obviously, this is an all hands on deck situation for the modern world. We need more people to be activists. And wouldn't it be great if that was also beneficial to their health?
Well, we know that patients who engage with their physicians do better.
Right.
And, I mean, most of my work is with patients whom I don't know that I see who are acutely ill in the hospital. So we don't have a backstory. So when I meet them, I try and find some common ground to make a connection because I know that if they're connected to me, whether we have a similar hobby or live in the same part of the world or grew up or, just like the same sports team, it doesn't really matter what it is. But if I can make a connection, then I know that our relationship, even though it's not much, it's better than none, and it will actually help them remember to take their medications and comply with their therapy and ultimately do better. But now, when you talk about engagement, be a little more specific. Are you talking about engagement in terms of activism of helping to cure the planet or just cure their own problem?
Right. Well, I take a pretty broad view of that word. So, yes, activism, political activism in efforts to save habitats, save the atmosphere, save water, all of those things, those are valid forms of activism. But even a more general form of being active in our own lives, whether it is exercise, movement, that kind of thing, engaging with people in our community, our neighbors, that kind of thing. So very broad look at the word activism and its beneficial effects.
So engagement really with the environment and with society,
Mhm.
coupled with a sense of responsibility. It sounds like, right? You're part of the solution, but you're part of the problem. So get off the couch.
Right. Yeah. And that's it's so needed right now because as I look at modern attitudes toward the natural world and our current crisis, there's a lot of denial. A lot of people simply are not talking about this. And obviously we have a crisis in the atmosphere, we have a crisis of biology and biodiversity, we have a crisis in mental health and spiritual health, all of these things, but we also have a crisis of discourse. In other words, people aren't really talking about these issues very much. If you look at the typical survey of voter concerns, it's always the economy is number one, and things like corruption, nuclear war, those kind of things maybe are in the middle of the list. And at the very bottom, maybe climate change, but you never see biodiversity or fresh water or
Hmm.
habitat destruction. You never see those on the list. We aren't even talking about the primary issue of life support on this planet. And if you can't talk about it, you sure aren't going to be able to act on it. So that's where I always begin these conversations. We got to talk more.
All right, so let's skip ahead. Where does it end? Tell us about the last chapter of your book. What do we need to do? Where are we going?
Right. Well, first step to talk, but then I think the next step is to take a broader orientation of journeys and destinations. So here's what happens. People get involved in activism and they find it to be stressful and frustrating and difficult
Hmm.
because there's a lot of defeats. If you are an environmental activist, you lose all the time. I mean, you have to fight really hard for any kind of victory at all. And that's why people avoid it. That's why it's often depressing and frustrating. So what we need to do is work with some of the traditional teachings about spirit, journey, and destinations. We need to focus on the journey and maybe not worry quite so much about the destination. That's the solution to avoiding burnout because if your well-being is completely tied to the success of reaching a particular destination, you're always going to be frustrated. So we have to create a certain quality of journey here. And that means finding people that you can relate to and work with in your activism, and making the process meaningful and enjoyable. And then the destinations, yeah, they're still important, but maybe a little bit less so.
Well, I really love that you're concerned about the environment. It got to the point where every email I get is asking for money about some disaster
Right.
and from the environmental agencies. And that's really not, what that's not the ship you want to climb on when you're interested in the environment. You want to see the beautiful things, you want to focus on all the wonderful things, and of course, to protect them. But if protecting them is your only mission, yeah, I think that does kind of lend itself to well, it's sort of the negative side um, of the equation, and probably can lead to burnout. What about your organization? Should if you join that organization, what happens?
Well, it's not really a membership organization. It's three activists, myself and two other fellows, and we do interviews and we talk to people who are activists, who are biologists, and who are deeply concerned. We talk to writers and we publish our interviews. And we also offer a once a month program for elders who are interested in their role in the world. And we have conversation, you might call them climate conversations, where people get a chance to express their feelings, their emotion about what it's like to be an elder activist. And that's a lot of fun. It's we explore, we'll give a short presentation about for example, last time we talked about the Overton window. We talked about messaging and how to get your story across. And then we have conversations about it. So that's what you can get when you go to our website.
Well, I love that because the elderly, if you will, or particularly retired, it's an enormous resource of human beings who, in some cases, are searching for a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
They're retired, they're still, in various states of health, but most of them pretty functional. And yet, the purpose of their raising their children and, working for 30 years, all of that is kind of behind them, and finding a new purpose and new friends. Loneliness is kind of a national issue now, particularly among people who are older. So I see this as a nice, really a perfectly placed opportunity for people looking, for sort of a second purpose. And there's no more important one than saving the planet, to get on board. Now, tell me your website address.
Simply type in "activism is medicine" and you'll get it. It's activismismedicine.net.
.net. Okay,
Yeah, yeah,
activismismedicine.net. Perfect.
yeah.
Perfect.
Or if you search for the book title, it's on all the usual places. So,
And the
and
book's in Amazon, right?
is Amazon everywhere else, but also you can go to humananimal.earth, and that's my website. So,
Humananimal.earth. I like that. That
yeah.
you didn't have to fight for that one. No, nobody else had that.
Right.
That's fantastic. Well, Frank, we're getting a little close to time. Is there anything you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Not really, just that it's it's such an exciting journey to get involved in activism. I mean, I've met so many great people along the way, and it's worth doing simply for that and nothing else. I mean, it's great to succeed. It's great to have the destination work out the way you want. But along the way, if you get involved with other activists, you're going to have a great time. So these are some of the best people you're going to meet anywhere. And it's worth doing for that reason alone.
Well, Frank Forencich, thank you very much for joining me on the Art of Medicine.
Wonderful. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Before we close, I'd like to give another thanks to our sponsor, locumstory.com, a resource where providers can get real, unbiased answers about locum tenens. I'm Dr. Andrew Wilner. See you next time.
This program is hosted, edited, and produced by Andrew Wilner, MD, FACP, FAAN. Guests receive no financial compensation for their appearance on the Art of Medicine. Andrew Wilner, MD, is Associate Professor of Neurology at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, Memphis, Tennessee. Views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on this program belong solely to Dr. Wilner and his guests and not necessarily to their employers, organizations, or other group or individual. While this program intends to be informative, it is meant for entertainment purposes only. The Art of Medicine does not offer professional financial, legal, or medical advice. Dr. Wilner and his guests assume no responsibility or liability for any damages, financial or otherwise, that arise in connection with consuming this program's content. Thanks for watching. For more episodes of The Art of Medicine, please subscribe. www.andrewwilner.com